Hi there, welcome back to our channel. For those of you who have not met me yet, my name is Colt Utley. I'm a building contractor in Spokane, Washington. Name of my company is Build Northwest. And today I'm putting a slideshow together because I get together with people and talk about decks, and I have all of these different options that they can choose from, and they really have no idea what some of these things are or why you would want to do them. So I'm going to go into depth here on some different options and components that you want to consider adding to your deck before you build. So with that, let's get going. And as we get into those details, consider too that a lot of stuff that's inside of those options is really buying time for you or protecting your investment. So here's what we're going to cover in this video. The foundation, the very beginning, beams, framing materials, weather barriers, joist tape, hidden fasteners versus face screwed, picture framing, and options for fascia. First up, let's start talking about the foundation. Sure, you've heard the term before, build your house on a rock. Boy, they really took this one to the next level. Pretty crazy picture here. But, you know, your deck is really an extension of your house. It is a structural, there's a lot of structural components to it, and you really do want to put a really good foundation on it. And there is one exception. Floating decks. And as the term says, that's exactly what your deck is doing, is it's floating above the ground here. The biggest problem with floating decks is that they're going to move as the weather changes and the ground freezes. It's going to expand and contract, and basically the water in the soil is going to come up here, it's going to get in here, and it's going to start heaving all of this stuff up. So if you have a deck right now that's not level, this is probably the culprit right here, that the foundation didn't get put below the frost level. Also depends on where you live. I don't know, maybe if you're in Phoenix, maybe they do this all the time there. I don't live there, I wouldn't know. But I live in the Northwest and we get lots of freezing, and this is a big deal. So basically, when it comes to floating decks, you know, if you're low to the ground, you are not attached to the house, then you're probably okay. You know, when it's a smaller deck, you're probably okay with doing a floating deck. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is a quick and easy way to build a deck, because there is a lot of work in putting holes in the ground and pouring that concrete in there. Okay, so this is the way that we do it. Of course, we come below our frost depth here, and then when we put our concrete in the ground, now we need to attach our posts to the concrete. Okay. Of course, there is another way to do it, which is you can put your post inside of the concrete. I do not like this method. I see this done on fences a lot, but what happens is water gets in here and then it starts going down the posts, and then it's holding that water up against that concrete, and there's no way for that water to get out. So the way that we do it is we will put a post base on top of the concrete, as seen there. And then, of course, we have lots of different options on which post bases we can use. Personally, myself, I like these ones. These ones are called a standoff post. They're a little bit more money, but I like the way that my wood is not touching my concrete, or if it's near some dirt, it's not getting dirt on it. Basically just keeps it up out of the weather. I know that a lot of guys will use these things basically for this reason right here, because they are cheaper. But I just don't like the water getting underneath a major structural component of the deck. So therefore I use these ones, and my deck estimate's going to be a little bit more expensive because I use that. And then, of course, you know, some people, they like the decorative aspect of these, and of course the price goes up for that. Okay, next up, beams. Beams are basically the backbone of your deck. They support the weight of the deck and transfer it to the posts. It's recommended to use flashing on top of the beams to protect them from moisture and increase the lifespan. Flashing on top of your beams also helps to create a barrier between the joists and the beams, preventing water from seeping into the beam and causing rot. Okay, so let's talk about weather barriers and issues with rot. First off, let's talk about treated lumber versus non-treated lumber. When it comes to building a deck, I always use treated lumber, and that's because there's a chemical that's applied to it that will help that wood resist decay and rot and insects. Of course, it costs a little bit more money, but there is a difference between treated lumber. Some of it is just treated, some of it is pressure treated. This slide here, this is pressure treated lumber. You can see by these indentations here that it's a mechanical system. They'll spray the chemicals on it, and then they'll use a mechanical system to actually inject and push those chemicals in even deeper. Okay. So Vicor and joist tape, what the heck is it? Okay, well, first off, notice that Vicor is a brand name. Okay, just like Kleenex. Kleenex is actually facial tissue, and Vicor is actually a weather barrier product. It's a self-adhesive waterproof membrane or a flexible self-adhesive flashing. It's relatively new out there in the world of building decks. I've been seeing it now for about 10 years or so. I think it's an excellent product. We love to use this stuff, and it is definitely a great way to preserve and buy some time for your deck. So you can see here, I talked about that pressure treating, and you could see here where that pressure treated is really drove those chemicals in the wood, but it doesn't get the whole entire thing. So this is one of those places that we really like to add some tape, really to protect that wood again. Speaking of protecting, this is just one of the methods that we use. This is pretty common, totally acceptable way of fastening your joists to the top of your beams. We don't really like putting 57 nail holes in the top of our beam. We're trying to protect that thing. So this is the way that we do it. We use these hurricane ties, or sometimes we use clips here. But basically, it's just trying to keep from putting any holes in the top of this beam and giving yet another place for water to get in and start rotting out your deck. The ledger board. Oh my gosh, I can really go off on ledger boards. Part of the reason for this is that it's one of the most critical components of your deck. And you can see here that it's attached to the house. And what it's doing is it's supporting one side of the deck. And if these things are not installed properly, well, I tell you what, you can really have some trouble with them. This is the number one reason why decks fail and why I go into detail on ledgers, because I'm just like, hey, even if this is for a novice builder or something, if you're going to get one thing right, get that ledger right. And so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on those ledgers. This isn't the how-to video, but I'm throwing this part in. Okay, so the first thing you do is you remove the siding. This is a job that I walked up on, and somebody asked me to come out and take a look at it, and I saw that they were just they just put the ledger right up against the house here. It is the wrong way to do it. You're asking for trouble if you do this way. If you see somebody doing this, they didn't take the siding off of your house and they're putting the ledger. Personally, myself, I would just fire them. But anyways, let's get into a little bit more detail. So that's the first step, remove the siding. Second step, add spacers to the ledger. Okay, you can see here, this is a ledger that we put our spacers on this. And basically what you're doing is putting these spacers on in order to allow airflow in case water does ever get behind this ledger. It creates airflow and it gives a way for the water that's in there, if it gets in there, place for it to escape. Okay, so this slide here shows a properly installed ledger. Okay, so we're just going to go over this. We've got some flashing that is going over the top of the ledger here, and then the building paper goes on top of that, basically keeping any water or anything from getting behind this piece of flashing here. And then you can see that there's flashing here and here behind the ledger, basically keeping any water off of the house. Then you can see some spacers for airflow here. There's lots of different ways to use spacers. My way isn't necessarily the right way. It's the way that we've chose to do it. Flashing, you can see the flashing behind the ledger, and then you can also see flashing above the siding here. So again, we're trying to keep that water from getting back behind that siding there. And this is what can happen if you don't flash the ledger. You saw that one slide where the deck had actually fallen off the house. This is one that we got to and started demoing the deck and found out that the ledger was in this kind of condition. And boy, I tell you what, it's lucky we got to it in time. This thing could have crashed down and killed someone. But, you know, and this is what happens behind it. If you don't flash behind it and if you don't do that ledger properly, it just causes lots and lots of damage. You can imagine this water starting to get inside of the house and causing mold inside of the house too. It's just a bad deal. It's maybe all you have to do is just do the ledger right, and you can minimize or mitigate all of this stuff. Okay, next up, face screwed versus hidden fasteners. Okay, so face screwed, as it sounds, is basically you can see those screws on the top of your decking. There's two different types of fastening systems that we can use. We can use the hidden fastener system or the face screwed system. And then as we get into hidden fasteners, now there's about 3 different types that we can use. You can see the hidden fastener right inside of there. Basically, our 3 choices on hidden fasteners is we can use clips, we can use Cortex, or we can do an angle screw. All of them are completely acceptable. My preference myself is actually using the hidden fastener clips, but there are applications why you would want to use an angle screw. Maybe you're using real wood instead of composite decking. That would be a good reason. Cortex is a name brand of some plugs that we can buy, and then basically that hole is drilled out, and then we put that plug in there and it conceals. A lot of people don't like the Cortex option though, just because you can still kind of see those things, and a lot of them disappear, but you know, I think the hidden fastener clips are better, so that's why I tend to do that. One thing to keep in mind though is when you're doing hidden fastener systems, you cannot hide all of the fasteners. You can see here that inside of our miter here and inside of our picture frame that we need to put some screws in here to make sure this decking stays down. And I could use Cortex on this. I could use angle screws on this, and now we're talking about using 3 different systems on one deck. And could we make them all completely hidden? Sure we could, but that's going to be some extra cost for sure. And we found that, you know, a lot of times we just have handrail coming over the top of this stuff anyways, and you just don't really see those screws all that much. And for the most part, where you're really looking out here in the field, you just don't see them. So I mentioned picture framing. Let's get into picture framing, how and why you'd want to do it. Okay, what you see here is the manufacturer has taken material out of here that's really not needed for the structural of the decking. Makes their product less expensive for you. Okay, we can get decking that is completely square. It costs more usually. And most of it has these grooves in the bottom. And you can see that if you don't cover up these grooves, you know, it could look better. So what types of different picture frames. You can get all kinds of different picture frames out there. This one shown in this picture here is called a double, and you can see that we actually try to minimize these miters as much as possible, which is why you can see that this is a square cut on these two pieces of decking. But there are places where we need to do it, and that's why we do it there. Again, this one is a double. You can do a single. I guess you could even do a triple or a quadruple if you wanted to, but that's the basics of a picture frame. One thing to keep in mind, though, when you are doing picture frame is on your steps, there is a ton of work involved in, if you've got 16 steps leading down from your deck, there is a lot of work involved in picture framing those steps. So some contractors, myself is included, and I do not include this in my deck estimates, but I definitely give it as an option. But it's really a lot of work on these things, so we like to give it as an option and let you choose the pricing on those. Finally, let's talk about fascia. Fascia is the board that covers the rim board or the outermost joist. There's composite fascia material out there. It's an excellent choice for fascia because it's durable and doesn't require a lot of maintenance. But fascia really is an essential component of the deck because it covers the rim board and it gives your deck the polished look. So yes, there's composite materials out there, but there's lots of different materials that we can use for this. So I just want to go over a couple of details on this. When you put your fascia, you have the option of putting your fascia board up and cover this decking. And now you wouldn't necessarily need to do picture framing on this to cover up those grooves that we saw on the other slide. I don't particularly like this option because what this does is this gives an opportunity for water to go right in that gap right there and travel down and start rotting this board out, and it holds that water up against there. Put some spacers in there, I guess, to help it drain and help it air out and all of that stuff. But really what I like to do is I like to actually, before I go there, here's a picture of what it looks like when we pull off some of that fascia material that was used to cover the edge of decking, and here's the reason why I don't like to do it that way. Anyway, here's what I think is a better way to do this. I like to take the edge of my decking and overhang it over the top of my fascia, so that really what I'm doing is I'm getting some weather protection over the top of that fascia. I'm getting less opportunity for water to get in between this board and the joist and the lumber in between there. But when it comes to fascia, really there's a lot of options out there. Just about any product that you could use to side a house with, you could use for fascia. You could see here that they put stone on this one. It's a really nice look. This one here, of course, this one was made out of cedar. Gosh, the sky's the limit as far as what you can use for fascia material out there. What I typically do is I use a siding product by Louisiana Pacific. I use LP siding, and then it's painted, and it's a nice option there. We usually tie this into whatever colors are going on the house, and it's about the least expensive option out there for your fascia material. And again, I like to protect that edge by hanging my decking over the top of that stuff. But you can do all kinds of stuff with fascia. Here's one that's stacked, and it's actually a really nice look, but really there's a lot of options out there. So speaking of options, so this is why you can have so many different you can have a contractor that gives you one price and it'll vary widely from another contractor's price. This is what I like to do. I like to come in here and give people options for this, so you can see somebody can come in here and just select the picture framing, and maybe they do want to go ahead and picture frame on those stairs. So this one's actually an assembly here. They'd have to select all of those. But anyways, if you don't know that these options exist, it's kind of hard to explain, which is the purpose for putting this video together. Well, that pretty much sums it up. Thank you for your time. I'm sure you gained some insight on how to build decks and how to build them correctly and different options that you have. If you have any comments, I'd sure appreciate it if you'd put them down in the comment section below. Of course, questions, I love answering them. And thank you again for your time.